Today is October the 30th, 1999, at the 12th Armored Division at Reunion in Covington, Kentucky. Again, we're talking to an MP, Division MP, Nicholas
Yeah. Kepf.
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 Yeah.
I have a hardest time with Kepf. It's that Texas. Okay, yesterday this is the second tape we've done with you, and yesterday we kind of got down to Dachau, and so let's go a little past Dachau and see what you need to tell us.
Well, after we got into parts of Austria there, we were pulled off of the line May the 6th. We were finished with our combat duties, and our division was transferred up to Heidenheim, and most of it. It was dispersed among the different cities in the Stuttgart area. And that's where we set up our CP, collected other prisoners of war, and shipped them to Holland. And from there, they were discharged from the PW cage. And
The PW cage?
yes, Holland was an area for prisoner of war.
It was a large
Area, right? It was a collecting area. And then we resumed most of our regular MP duties, as some of us did, and I did a couple of town patrol duties while in Heidenheim, but then we started to pick up more prisoners, and than what we expected. They were still coming out of the woods, so we just had a stockade built by the 119th Engineers to accommodate the prisoners that we were collecting, and then transfer them by truck to Holland. And during that time, I made friends with the Germans, as always, for reasons of my own, to get information, find out about the Nazis and everything. And I befriended a little girl who was about 8 years old, and she was cross-eyed. And I asked her if she knew if her mother was aware that she could have this corrected, and later on especially. And I said, if your mother will buy you glasses, I will give you the money. So she come back, she says, yes, my mother will do that. I took a chance. I gave her a handful of marks, and I said, you tell your mother to buy you glasses with it. I never met her mother or anything. And by God, 2 days later, she come back, she had glasses. She was real proud of them. Well, there was another incident where a little girl came down and said, my mother wants to see you. And she lived on the second floor of this apartment complex. And we had the lower floor, and we had a complete complex on this side for our troops. And I said, well, what does your mother want to see me about? She didn't say. I said, well, okay, you show me where you live. So we went upstairs, and I knocked on the door, and she answered, and she says, they called me Herr Kepf. So I said, all right, what did you want to see me about? And she says, I want to show you something. I said, well, where is it? She said, up in the attic. I said, well, I'll tell you what. You go up and I'll follow you. But I was always loosened my holster, and I said, okay, go ahead. So she went upstairs, and up in this attic, there was like a closet. And I said, well, what is it you want me to see? And she says, reach in that closet and you'll see what it is. So I reached in the closet and I brought two books out. One of them was Most of the Members of the Nazi Party of Bavaria. And the other one, I was so excited when I saw that, I didn't even look at that one. And she told me that the treasurer of the Nazi Party was a school teacher at Ulm. So, well, I took it downstairs and I showed Sergeant Wild, and he says, well, what are we going to do with it? I said, we got to call the CIC. Took it over to the office where First Sergeant was, and I said, we got to call the CIC because I think this is very important. Because this was only about a month after the war, and they were still looking for him and other members of the Nazi Party, which they didn't know about. So the sergeant says, I'll just put him there. But he did call the CIC. And I saw these agents come in, and they grabbed the books, and they were running out with them, jumped in the car, and that's the end that I ever heard. I never saw them again. I never heard what happened. And even when I was at the Holocaust Memorial in Washington, I tried to talk to this gentleman who was in charge of it, but he left the day just before I got there, and so I could never get in touch with him. And I thought, well, after 50 years, maybe I don't need to be in touch with it. And that's also when I got acquainted with the CIC. They were going after the Wolfhounds, and it was a terrorist organization, German, and they headquartered in, thinking of the name in the city. Well, anyway, this is where the Volkswagens were manufactured.
Tell me what the acronym CIC stands for.
Counterintelligence Corps. And so they came up, they needed a MP that could speak German, because quite a few of them couldn't speak German. And so, okay, they told me the circumstances. And they took me to a fellow's house, and he was one of the terrorists. And so he showed us two other terrorists, and those are the two that they were really looking for. They were two brothers. They had the dynamite, the instruments of destruction, really, all kinds of munitions, and they were going to blow a couple of bridges, and the CIC found out about it, and so they arrested them, and then I was finished with them. And so I was transferred from the 12th Armored Division to Esslingen, Germany. And I was transferred to the 6th Corps MPs. And I wasn't there more than 2 weeks when the Provost Marshal called me in, and he says, we're having speeders in Esslingen, and see if you can stop it, because they accidentally killed a couple of German civilians. So, okay, that was about a week's time where that was cleared up. So he says, how would you like to take a mission? He says, this will be a while. It'll be 3 or 4 months. I said, well, what is it? He says, we're having so many problems with the VD situation in Esslingen. He said, I'm getting stacks of complaints, and he says, we have to do something to clear it up. Would you take it? I said, well, I would under only one circumstance, that whenever I approach a girl, she'll have to be with an American soldier. I said, I won't approach her with a German man or whatever. I said, this will have to be strictly with an American soldier. He says, do what you have to do. And I said, I have another question. May I select a German detective to be assigned to me? And he says, yes. So I had a fellow by the name of Hans Fackler. He was a lieutenant in the criminal division of the Esslingen police. which was automatically under the military police. And so the first night, I was trying to think, how to work it. So I saw an American soldier with a German girl, and I walked up to him and I said, "Now I want to explain something to you. I'm going to tell you the same thing I'm going to tell the girl in German, that I want her to report to the Board of Health at 10 o'clock in the morning." He says, "Why?" I said, "To be examined for VD." And he says, "Well, do you think she has it?" I said, "I have no idea." I said, "If you want to leave her now, you may, or you can go with her. It's up to you. You make that decision. I can't make it for you." And I did that for about 4 months. I filled up 2 hospitals, a lager where displaced persons were lived one time, and they put iron bars on the windows so the girls couldn't escape. And so I took care of that. Another incident was Major said, "We're having gasoline, they're taking gasoline out of our motor pool." And it's got to the point where our officers are walking. And I said, "Okay, you want me to take care of it?" And he says, "Yes." So I got my German detective, and I set up a roadblock. And this roadblock was a road leading from Schneid, which is a town right outside of Hesselingen, pardon me. And I stopped their car. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and made them get out, checked the back of the car, and they had 2 5 jerry cans of gasoline in it. So I opened the lid. I could tell German gas from American gas by the color. So I said, "Where'd you get the gasoline?" I bought it. I said, "Oh, you did? Where?" And they told me. I said, "Hans, let's take them and lock them up." We see our jails were open all the time. So we just temporary jail, put them in there. So I went out this address, and this was, probably 2:30 in the morning. Knocked on the door, and the man answered. And I said, "May we come in?" And he says, "Yes." So I asked him, if he had any gasoline and where he got it from. And then the wife came downstairs with their son, who was about 15 years old. And I started asking them questions. And so use a little tactics of my own, which I can't explain. And so the mother says, "Yes, there's an American soldier that stops here in like a 3/4 ton truck, and he's a mailman for the Americans, and he picks up the mail. But when he picks up the mail, before he picks up the mail, he passes our house and he drops off jerry cans of gasoline." I said, "All right. Did you ever notice the numbers on the front of it?" She says, "I noticed a couple of them, but she was close." And I said, "Well, I thank you very much." And I said, "Well, I'm going to have to take your husband with me." So, of course, it was the same old story. Everybody started crying, and locked him up. And I checked around, and I found out, went to the CQ. He was up, and I said to the CQ, "Who's a mailman? Who's a mail carrier here, and who picks up the mail and whatever?" And he said, "He's sleeping in there." I said, "Just point out where he's sleeping." So he pointed it out. So I tippy-toed there. I said, "You stay here," because I drew my gun, and I had my flashlight. And I said, "You stay here. I'll be right back." So I went out, and I came back, and I said, "Well, I think you're very much." And I said, "Just point out where he's sleeping." So he pointed it out. So I tippy-toed there. I said, "You stay here," because I drew my gun, and And I put the flashlight in his eye and the gun right to his head. And I said, get up real slow because you're under arrest. And he got up and he looked. He says, well, I wondered when you were going to catch me. And locked him up. They called the major about 5 o'clock in the morning. And he says, I'll be right down. And he came down and they put charges against him and court-martialed him. Of course, I didn't take part. I didn't want. See, I didn't like. I stayed away from those kind of things so they wouldn't know who I was. And so he got court-martialed for that.
Generally, as you're occupying Germany, what was the predominant feeling of American soldiers in occupation? Was it positive, negative, abusive?
Towards the German people?
Yes.
I would say it was 90% positive and about 10% negative. If you talk to GIs today, they will all say, I like the German people. And that was the attitude there. Of course, some of them, you know, about 10% of them, they didn't care one way or the other, or it was negative. But really the relationship between the German people and American soldiers was very cordial, I think. Because we didn't have any terrorist attacks. We didn't find any German soldiers, American soldiers dead and or wounded or stabbed. There was no crime. And the biggest crime in Germany at that time was stealing a pair of silk stockings. And because German police were still strict. And this Hans Fackler, the one that I mentioned, he was one of the first German police officers permitted to carry a weapon. However, it was a rifle, so we could see it at all times. We still didn't trust. And I counted his bullets every day. And when he gave me the rifle back, it was a carbine. And he was very, very helpful. Another case was when a truck was going through Esslingen and it ran over a little girl. And it just so happened at that time there's a lady looking out the window, and she saw the truck. Give us a description of it. And we found these men were displaced persons, and there were 3 of them. And the driver just got out and looked, and like, you know, nothing. And but we caught all 3 of them. And well, these were different things that also in Stuttgart, I was in the square, and I noticed a fellow selling diamonds, things like that. So I arrested him, and I asked him his name. He says, my name is Franz Ledermann. I said, oh, where do you live, Franz? And he told me, and went up to his apartment, and I saw fox furs, shirts, sugar, anything, coffee, anything you wanted, it was there. So I said, well, okay, we're going to have to sit down here, and I want to hear your story. And he said, where were you born? He said, Polish Corridor. Well, that's near the Danzig area. And I said, what about your parents? He said, my parents were very wealthy. And when the Germans invaded, they arrested my parents immediately, the Gestapo. And they put him in a concentration camp. That included him and his sister. And they tried to force from the mother and the father where they hid the money. The children didn't know. And they really went through some things. They suffered, beat them, And finally, when they couldn't get the information they needed, they were burned, and they were put in the ovens. And the same way with the sister. Other things were done, and she was burned, put in the ovens. And fortunately, he was beaten and everything, but for some reason or other, he lived through it. And the Russian soldiers liberated him from the concentration camp, and gave him a bottle of vodka. I said, Franz, you can't tell me that you got all this together from a bottle of vodka. And he says, yes, I did. And I said, okay. And I thought, oh, who am I to judge this man? After what he's gone through, I just can't do it. I said, we went back to the square, and I said, let me tell you something. If I catch you again, it's going to be different. I said, if you see me quit, whatever you're doing. And this friendship lasted about 2 or 3 months. I became friends with him. And I told him one day, I said, well, I'm going home to the United States. And he says, well, he called me Klaus, because Nicholas is Klaus. And he says, you're not going home. You can't, because I'm going to give you a present. I said, well, I can't take presents, really. He says, this is different. He says, you like snake rings? I said, yeah, why? He says, how would you like to have a ring with a snake with 2 heads on it? I said, you do what you want. I said, but I'll see you later. And I did go back to the square, but it was for a different reason, because I started to work with Special Branch. And he spotted me. He says, Klaus, I got the ring for you. And he gave it to me. It was a diamond with a jade. You know, not a big diamond. It may be a 1/4 of a carat or something like that. And I said, okay, thank you very much. And he gave me a big hug, and that was it. But we went over to another house that we were investigating, but this was with Special Branch. And he was a friend of Max Schmelling's, a boxer. And so they had relatives in the United States, but they were very wealthy people. And we talked to them quite a bit, trying to get information if they were Nazis or not. I still think he was, but I know she wasn't. And so During gave me the signal, Captain During gave me the signal to search the house. So I went through like a chest of drawer, and I pulled the drawers out all the way, all the time, because usually they take bags of jewelry and put it in the back, so you pull it out. And there were other places that we would search that most people wouldn't even think about. And so we didn't find anything there. And I said, well, Captain, what are we going to do if he is a Nazi, you know? So we just let him go. And that was an incident there. It was quite interesting. Quite interesting. And one of the last things that I did, well, I did chase some of the French soldiers who deserted the French army in Stuttgart when they were told to leave, because that became American Army of Occupation. And they were French Moroccan soldiers. So they stayed there. They didn't want to go back. They stayed in Stuttgart. So there was one that we really wanted bad. And I was with Hans that time, and was driving, and I spotted, I could tell French Moroccans, you know, from people. And I swung my Jeep around and sped up, but he ran into like a hallway, and then the back of the hallway there was like a big yard, a huge yard. And so when I started running after him, I had a pistol. It looked like a camera. It was a Belgian pistol. And So I thought, well, I'm not going to chase him anymore. So I just got that out. And when I saw him, he was up on the rise of a hill, and I shot it, and he went down. And I run over to get him, and I made him get up. And he said he was hit. And I said, well, we'll get you to German hospital. Not thinking, took him to the German hospital, and the German doctor, he wasn't thinking right at first. And all of a sudden he asked me, he said, wait a minute, is he an Allied soldier? And I said, yes. He says, I can't operate on him. Get him out of here. I thought, oh my God, that's right. So I took him to an American hospital, and he was operated on there. And he was, they sent other MPs after he was operated on. He was given a crutch, and they brought him to Esslingen and put him in jail there. And we hauled about 7 of them at one time to Reutlingen, which is the French headquarters in Europe at that time. And we just turned them over to the French troops, and that was the end of it. That incident was over. So, last one was when I was in Ellwangen. I was ready to come home, and so there was an armed robbery in Stuttgart, and they were like cowboys and Indians. They put handkerchiefs over their faces and robbed it. And so Captain During come up again, and he says, Nick, can you take off and come back to Esslingen and I'll get authorization? I said, yes, I will. So I went back and checked out the area, tried to get some witnesses, because they lifted the wallets of the civilians. And the only money they got was Deutschmark, which were worthless, stupid. And so I finally got it down to one fella, and I don't mention his name, but I talked to him, and I told him, I said, now, you know, we can get this all straightened out. I want to go home, and you can go home soon. And I said, I will get it out if you make me work at it. And he says, no, I'll tell you. So I said, okay, tomorrow you bring the German Deutschmarks up to the Provost Marshal's office. And I said, by the way, how much did you get? He said, 75,000 marks. And I said, okay, you bring it up there. And During was with me, the captain. And so we met, Captain During and I met up there. And this happened to be a new Provost Marshal. And so he says, oh, they brought some money in here, and they said to give it to Captain During. Yeah. Captain During says, how much is it? He says, 50,000 marks. I said, wait a minute. And Captain During, we both said it at the same time. He says, how much? It's 50,000. I said, you know what, Captain, I'll tell you, we're going to leave. And I'm pretty sure you're going to find 25,000 around here somewhere. And we'll be back in a couple hours. Came back in a couple hours, there was 25,000. Oh, I found it, there's 25,000. So it was worthless money as far as we're concerned. And so I said, well, may I make a suggestion? And Captain During says, yes. Let's give it to the German Red Cross. It belongs to them anyway. So we did. I had a paper bag. I put it all in there, just dumped it on his desk. And he was pleased at death with it. There was no. And the other one was my last case was I was walking down the street at Ellwangen, and I see a GI selling cigarettes. And I'm going to see if I can still work it. So I told him he couldn't, do that. Told this lady to give the money back. GI, she got the money back, he got the cigarettes. So she turns to me, she says, "Why did you do that?" I said, "'Cause it's against the law. You're not allowed to do that." And got to talking, and she says, "Would you take me home?" I said, "No, wait a minute. Why?" She says, "Just take me home." She says, "I don't live very far from here." I said, "Okay." So she says, "You can come in the house." And I said, "No, I'm not supposed to do this, you know." So she says, "You don't have to worry." She says, "I'm a married lady, and I just want you to come in." I said, "All right." So I went in, and I got the biggest shock of my life. There sits her mother, two big Great Dane dogs in a chair. I mean, all kinds of rugs, Oriental rugs. Big, big place. And I thought, wow, what's going on here? And she's perfect English. She went to school in London, this girl. And her mother was a great, great granddaughter of Queen Victoria. That came from the German line of the British throne. And perfect English. And I knew I was in, you know, these were cultured people. And I said, well, I'm sorry I had to take the cigarettes away from you. And she says, "Well, that's all right." And I looked, and I saw a picture of a German general in the SS. And I knew the ranks, you know, and everything. And I said, "Well, who's that?" She was foolish for putting it up. And she said, "That's my husband." I said, "Wow, he's in the SS, yeah." I said, "Where is he?" She says, "I don't know. He hasn't come home yet." Probably didn't come home for a long time if he ever came home. And I said, "Wow." She says, "Would you like a glass of wine?" I said, "Yeah, I would appreciate it very much." So she brought me a glass of wine, and she was talking about her ancestors. She wanted to know what I did in the United States, and, you know, it was just conversation. And she says, "Will you come tomorrow night?" And I said, "Yeah, if I'm not leaving on the train to go home." So I did. And same thing, have a glass of wine, conversation, and want to know where I was in Germany, and, you know, same old story. And she says, "Are you going to go home?" I said, "I think I'm leaving tomorrow." And she says, "Will you do me a favor?" I said, "What is it?" She says, "Will you send me some rum candy?" This girl didn't know that there was a war. And I said, "Rum candy?" I said, "Yes, I'll send you some." I said, "You want 2 pounds?" "Yes, I'd appreciate it." So I said, "All right." Before I got to the door, she says, "Wait a minute." Her mother got a little ring, or small ring. It's, well, what would you call them? Chips, you know, and a little ruby. And it wouldn't even fit my finger. And she says, "This is for you." I said, "No." I said, "That'll fit my mother's hand. I'll give that to her." And I said, "But I will send you the candy." And I did. And then I got a picture of the castle that they had in Schleswig Holstein. You know where that is? Okay, it's part of Poland now. That's a big chunk of Germany that they lost in World War II. And it was their castle. And her name was Baroness von Tannhausen. Royalty. That was the last, that was it. I said, "No more. I'm not going to do any more. I'm going home." And that was the end of my career.
What month and year did you go back home?
I got home March the 23rd, 1946.
So you lived nearly a year after peace was made.
Yeah, I got the Army of Occupation Medal for that. Yeah.
What did you do when you came back into civilian life?
And civilian life? My dad bought a farm. I was never a farmer. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to find myself. And I started where I lived. I started a water department, and this was in 1954. I worked on a farm. My dad also owned a saloon, and in between, I was trying to find myself. And finally, I went to work in '54 with the Claremont County Water Department. Well, I started, I was the first one hired. No superintendent, there wasn't anyone there. And now it's a big, big water department. And I retired as a safety director. That's the word I wanted to tell you. I couldn't figure it out. I retired from there in 1983. And I haven't worked a day in my life since. That was long enough.
So, overall, your experience in World War II, were they positive for your adult life? Was it a positive experience to train you for what was coming?
Well, if you eliminate the combat. But I think everything else, like helping poor Jewish people and innocent German people who no fault to their own, there was and in fact I'm proud that I could help some of the Jewish people. And yeah, I think so. I think it was mostly positive.
Was there ever a sense of, your family was from Poland, was there ever a sense of, I may be fighting my own people?
No, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. 1937, my parents took us over to Europe. We went over on the Queen Mary and came back on the Europa, which the British captured in World War II, changed the name. And that was my second trip over there to see my grandparents. And so when I got over there, things being strange to me, I could accept it. But as time went on, we were there 4 months. My dad just closed up his business, and he had a business nobody else could do, and he'd come back and start again. And so we were over there quite a few months. And people, their lifestyle was so completely different than ours. This is in the Balkans, not in Germany. It's in Donauschwaben. And they didn't have the convenience then. If a car came by, the horses would bolt, and if somebody bought a pound of beef, they didn't wrap it. They just put a little tissue paper, let everybody in the village see it. And I was used to at least hearing radios, going to a movie, eating popcorn. Those things were eliminated completely. Nothing. And I was 16 then, and my brother was 15. And my brother Frank, the one who was in Navy dive bombers, was a little rebel. He was little, he was big. But they had a festival, and this one time, the first time, and they played the Yugoslavian national anthem. So they arrested him because he didn't take his hat off. And they also arrested the band leader, or band director, because he didn't take his off. He thought, with both hands, that would be an excuse. So my dad went to court with him, and the judge said, well, why didn't you take your hat off when they played the Yugoslavian national anthem? My brother says, that's not my anthem. Star Spangled Banner is my anthem. So he said, well, if you do that again, well, you'll be punished. So there was a law in this village that if you rode a bicycle on a sidewalk, you'd be fined and punished. So this was Sunday morning, And here comes this Shandar riding on a bicycle. He's got a jug on the handle where he's going to try to get some wine. So when he passed my brother went, got the handle, and he goes flying. And of course he come up, he had his bayonet. But all the boys in that area, which were German boys, surrounded my brother. And they were speaking Serbian to the Shandar, you know. He didn't know any better and this and that, okay. So, went to court again. My dad there, and the judge says, now look, if you're going to live here, you're going to have to obey the laws. He says, I didn't disobey the law. He says, the Shandar did. He was not supposed to ride the bicycle on the sidewalk. So my mother found out about it. She says, we better get going. And when we did, we went through Germany, went through Innsbruck, up into Germany, to Bremen and Bremenhaven. And when we were at Bremenhaven, two guys come down. They were Gestapo agents, I found out. They came down to the pier, and they said, Kepf, my dad, we want to talk to you. He says, wait a minute, I want to take my family with me. He says, and we'd put a guard on my luggage. Yes. We go up, and there's a fellow sitting at a desk, and he tells my dad and mother to sit down, and they do. And he says, Herr Kepf, why are you going back to back to the United States? He says, well, that's my home, because he came over to the United States before World War I. And so he says, well, we don't want you to go back. My dad says, I don't know what you mean by that. He says, well, we don't want you to go back. And he says, we want your three sons in the German army. And my dad says, I want to see American counselor. And he says, well, you can go. So we walked out. We got on that boat, and we were happy. And that was the last time they saw me.
Well, I appreciate you coming in and doing this second part for us. I really do. Is there anything that I've left out that we haven't covered in our 2 days?
Pretty much so. There's some things, you know, that I can't reveal really. And but I will say my experiences in Germany, I do have a soft heart for Europe. I mean, all of Europe. I love Europe. And I love the United States more, but it's a change. I like that change bit. And I could live there for a while and then come back. A lot of Americans are living there, because when I was in Germany in 1990, when the wall came down, there was an American, I was reading a German newspaper, and I looked, it had a college. He had a sweatshirt on, it had American college's name up in Massachusetts. And I said, are you American? Just butting in. He says, yeah. I said, oh, I said, what are you doing reading the newspaper? He says, oh, I live here now. I said, you do? He says, yeah. And I said, were you in World War II? Because I knew a lot of these things happened. He says, yeah. He says, I was a fighter pilot. He says, I just love Germany. He says, my wife didn't want to move over here. Now I got a business established. He says, so she lives over there and I live over here. And I couldn't believe it, but this is the way the world is today.
Well, I appreciate it a lot. And don't forget your wife.
Okay.